Welcome to this second session of our continuous cover forest management of broadleaf plantation. In the previous session, we compared and reviewed the shelterwood system and the close to nature system, and also discussed briefly crown thinning and halo thinning. We also had a look at how forest naturally progress from regeneration, pole stage, semi-mature, and mature, and further regeneration stage. And in this session, we're going to take a closer look at the pole stage, at the thinning stage, which is most relevant to our current broadleaf plantations. In particular, we're going to focus on how to select our trees by timber quality, by vigour, and how to find best trees in our plantation and how to make sure that those will grow on into productive trees. So in terms of timber production through continuous cover forestry, the aim is really to grow quality hardwood sawlogs of approximately 40 to 60 centimetre diameter of breast height. We're seeing as under the shelterwood system, this is delivered at the end of a rotation-like process over a period of 10 to 15 years, while under the close to nature system, this leads to a continual harvesting of sawlog indefinitely. However, the blue arrow in the close to nature should look more like that, as under this system, thinning is more intensive earlier on, leading to a faster growth as a way to create more space in the forest to drive renewal and an irregular structure for continuous supply. Also, we are interested in intermediate products arising from intermediate thinnings of logs from 20 to 40 centimetre diameters. And if we factor that in, really our production, our value production window extends further, nearing to our time, especially in the close to nature approach. Currently, from our early thinning, we know we can produce profitably firewood when efficiencies and scales can be brought to bear. And also we know that we already have intermediate products, market for intermediate products, like for example, Hurley butts for the production of Hurleys. It will remain to be seen whether we'll be able to secure added value product for intermediate logs, but ultimately it'll be with the maturity of our sawlog trees and the full value of our timber production from our plantation will be realized. So here's the first question for us. What do you think will be the total standing volume per hectare when trees reach 60 centimetre diameter? In other words, full sawlog size. So at the thinning stage, following from initial establishment, maintenance and early management, trees go through a phase when they're free growing. And as they grow further, mutual competition will start affecting the growth rate as they run out of space. So to make sure that full growth, full vigor is maintained, thinning is a must. Without timely and appropriate thinning, trees will lose vigor. In other words, productivity will be reduced. So in the picture on the left, we can see the impact on the ring width of competition and lack of thinning. On the right, we see a tree that received timely thinning. You can see the regular wide ring width in its growth, leading to increased productivity. So thinning is very important, but the time of thinning is also critical. A very early thinning would lead to a bush-like structure for our trees if they're allowed too much light too earlier on with very short stems. And a long delay in thinning will compress the crown, reducing future productivity. So what we're really looking for is a balanced approach. So we're trying to drive natural competition to generate natural pruning and natural training, but at the same time, select and release our quality trees just in time to retain sufficient vigor for their future growth. So second question for us to reflect on: when do you think might be the optimal time to first thin your plantation to optimize both natural pruning and vigour. An important concept to discuss is the concept of social classes. As trees race to the sky, race to the light, different trees will develop at different rates. This is a combination, as a result of a combination of their genetics and their positioning within the forest. Some trees will conquer more space in the forest canopy and develop a larger crown, a larger canopy. These are called dominant. And when selecting quality trees, we should first look at the dominant trees. If those aren't available, the second choice should be from the co-dominant, or trees that are just behind the dominant trees. They have a favorable position, not as favorable as the dominant. We should really avoid selecting from suppressed trees. And if we must select from intermediate trees, we must do so keeping in mind that this will lead temporary low productivity as their crown develops. The important factor when selecting trees for retention is, of course, the quality of the stem in relation to their potential to mature into full sawlog products. Now, at this point, it is important, very important, to see what are the requirements of hardwood processors in terms of the future sawlogs. Now, currently, we don't have a developed processing industry in terms of hardwoods in Ireland, primarily as a result of lack of supply, as we don't have mature broadleaf forest producing regular volume of sawlog. But we can see what are the grades used in many European countries like France and Germany, and also across the UK, for sawlog produced from mature trees 40 to 60 centimeter diameter at breast height. The sawlog grades are generally divided between Class A, Class B, and Class C. Now, the Class A is the top grade for unblemished logs, perfectly straight, cylindrical, no knots, no branches. A minimum length of 2.5 meter logs with a minimum diameter of 45 centimeter. They're used for veneer or coopering, in which case the logs can be much shorter. And the important point to make here that those logs, even in well-managed plantations or natural forests, are rare. And those logs will look something like this. For less perfect logs, those are Class B. For first class planking, furniture making, and minimum log lengths of 2.5 meters and 35 centimeter diameter. Again, not very common. A third class logs, Class C, for second class planking, again a minimum length of 2.5 meters, 30 centimeter minimum diameter. Those type of logs are very common. Obviously, the other grade is firewood. Any tree, any log that doesn't make the grade will be classed as firewood, also arising from the crown of any quality sawlog tree and from intermediate thinning. Now, this is not immediately relevant to us in the sense that we don't have a lot of sawlog material out there in our plantation, but I think it's very important to keep in mind the end product we're trying to grow and what the specification of those need to be. Where we are now is here. What we're trying to do with our plantations within the continuous scope of forestry development roadmap is to grade the potential of our trees, our best trees, to match those grades, to match those sawlog grades. So in order to select our trees, we need to see a number of prerequisites. Healthy trees need to be selected with no damage of disease, stable and well-rooted, and here showing sufficient quality, and also importantly sufficient vigour, which we'll discuss in the next few slides. So any tree that doesn't have any potential for growing sawlog of any grade, maybe a firewood tree, this can be retaining definitely for its biodiversity or landscape value, importantly, or being removed, being thinned out if competing with better quality trees. So it's important that we don't select for retention trees like this. Now, the minimum quality that we need to see in a tree for retention is in relation to its potential to produce at least a Class C log. Okay, this and what we need to see in a young tree in order to achieve this potential are straight stem, straight trunk of 2.5 to 4 meters. Light sweep is acceptable, a few small knots and a few large knots also allowable. And a C tree would look something like this. Moving up the quality ladder, we could find trees with potential to grow a B class saw log, and these young trees will need to show between 4 and 6 meters straight, a light sweep again acceptable, with a few small knots allowed. And this tree would look something like this. Finally, the top of the quality ladder would be A grade trees showing more than 6 meters straight, no knots at all for the first 3 meters, giving the potential to grow veneer or top cabinet making grades or coopering. Now, it's important to note that as you move on the quality ladder for our young trees, it becomes more difficult to find A grade and easier to find C grade. In other words, C more common, A more common, less common, and this mirrors the end log results as discussed for the solid classes, for the third classes. Another important thing to keep in mind is that these qualities are transient. So an A tree across very different thinning could be demoted down into a B, and a B could improve, and we've seen that over and over. Trees kind of change over time, and B trees could become A trees, and indeed B trees could become C trees, and C become B trees. And any tree indeed could be demoted to a 5-wood tree if, for a number of reasons, for example, as a consequence of harvesting damage. So we've seen how quality is important in selecting our trees, but vigor is also paramount in order to ensure maximum growth potential going forward and to achieve mature trees of 40 to 60 centimeter diameter in the shortest possible time. So trees that have the highest possible quality stems with crown diameters of 50 to 60% of their total height as an ideal. Now, how do we measure vigor of our young trees? There is a number of ways to do that, but the methodology that I found more effective is one used in parts of North America and Europe. And basically, by multiplying the diameter at breast height of our potential selected tree by 0.2, we'll obtain a number which will give us the minimum crown diameters in meter for that tree to show sufficient vigor. Now, how does that work in practice? In this worked example here, on the left, we have a sycamore tree of 12 years of age with a diameter of breast height of 12 centimeters. A total height of 9 meters and an estimated quality Class A, i.e. the possibility to achieve a length of an A grade at maturity. Now, according to our rule of thumb, our minimum crown diameter that we need to see for minimum vigor, for sufficient vigor, is 2.4 meters. In actual fact, this tree has a 3.6 meter crown diameter. So the answer is yes, sufficient vigor, top quality, top vigor. This type of tree is ideal tree that we're trying to find in our plantations. Now, how do we know that the crown diameter is 3.6 meters? How do we measure that? A very simple way to do that is to stand at the drip line underneath the edge of the crown and just pace across and roughly measure the crown diameter. And now, this is a rule of thumb, is quite effective with its simplification, and other factors need to be considered. For example, species, crown health, leaf density, crown shape would need to be factored in our considerations when selecting a final timber tree. So another question for us, if the tree crown is not regular, lopsided and not symmetrical, how would we measure the crown diameter? So to go back on this quality, solid quality, one important thing to highlight is that at maturity, the majority of solid trees will display a number of solid classes. In fact, possibly all the solid classes on the tree. In fact, an A tree would show an A grade at the bottom, likely a B log at the second length, and a C at the top length or third length, with firewood also being produced from crownwood. Another important thing to highlight here is that while the bottom 6 meter length represent 35% of our final solid harvest, this constitutes 85% of the total value. And I would argue further that the bottom 3 meters of these 6 meters would probably constitute 70 to 80% of this 6 meter length value. So again, in the bottom few meters is where the majority of the value is, and that's where we should focus our attention. For example, with specific regard to high pruning, is very important. All our selected trees are high pruned, carefully high pruned to a 6 meter height. This is a good example of a mature solid tree, an oak tree, showing log classes of A, B, and C, including firewood. As discussed, its diameter of breast height is 56 centimeters and showing 27.7 meters in height for a total volume of 3.4 meter cubes. We can see a relatively short length of A class log at the bottom, generating good profit, good value, followed by the B log 3 meters, also high returns, and 6 meter of a C class log. IT here stand for industrial timber, which is a subset of C. Really, we could consider those two together as a C, and in this case is for the production of beams, oak beams. And following with the approximately 12 meter length of firewood. And when you bring it all together, total value of this 3 year harvest is €725. Again, just a good example of how all the different grades will play out within the one tree at final harvest. And again, how the bottom 6 meter, bottom few meters are the most valuable and the most productive part of our tree, and that's where our attention should really focus from early on. So we touched on quality, how to match our tree to future quality requirements, on vigor, how to identify sufficient vigor, and how to make sure that we retain vigor through the process of thinning. Another important point is how many quality trees should be looking for. How many is too many, how few is too few, on a per hectare basis. So 1 hectare is 100 by 100 square meters, 10,000 square meters, or 2.47 acres. So from the first session, we've seen that if we want to optimize quality and vigor, the dimension we need to see in a tree are such that we would fit approximately 70 of such trees into an hectare of our future forest. Here in the table, we can see how the numbers will play out for the sheltered system and the close to nature system across first thinning, second thinning, and as tree reach solid maturity. Now, first thinning, we define it as between 8 to 10 meters height when our plantation reach between 8 to 10 meters height. Second thinning, between 12 and 15 meters height. Now, for the shelterwood system, as we discussed, we will see higher stocking than the close to nature system as trees are crown thinned and their crowns are typically smaller. So as a guideline number, we would see at first thinning stage a selection of 300 potential timber trees reduced down to 200 at second thinning, leading to between 100 and 120 sawlog trees at maturity. For a close to nature management approach, we're looking at much smaller numbers, as this management system aims for a continual production, and to develop an irregular structure, we need to encourage regeneration early open the forest up early, which also leads into larger dimension canopy trees, as we discussed, hence fewer trees per hectare. So the numbers we're really looking at is between 70, possibly up to 150 trees per hectare at first thinning, early thinning, down between 70 and 100 at second thinning, and moving to 50 to 70 trees, sawlog trees, at approximately 20 to 30 meters height. Now, these are guidelines number, but give you a good reference in relation to selecting potential timber trees at each stage. Sometimes some pre-thinning on respacing might be required for some plantation, especially when plantation were planted at high stockings. So our final question, what do you think might be the approximate average distance between selected timber trees at thinning stage of 100 per hectare, 200 per hectare, or 300 per hectare? Bringing it all together, this pie chart here represents our young forest at first thinning stage. And really the focus at this stage is to find our quality, vigorous trees in the forest, which will be a smaller portion of our volume at this point, and remove competitors in order to favor the development of those trees. So really what we're looking at is trying to extend the blue portion of the slice of this pie to include the whole pie, while at the same time growing the pie to a much greater volume, so from maybe to 80 to 100 cubic meters on an early stage, up to 250, 300 and more cubic meters at a mature stage when sawlog harvesting commences. Here is our unthin plantation, rich in thinning stage. The focus for us is to identify quality elements in sufficient numbers, promote those either through crown or halo thinning. This in turn will favor the growth on, will bring them up in the canopy, while at the same time over successive thinning, opening up the forest and encouraging natural regeneration, which will move our plantation from the semi-mature into the mature and middle regeneration stage. Also gives us the opportunity to underplant at this point, introducing new species in the system, be it broadleaf, other broadleaves, or a minor component of some suitable conifer. And I find of particular interest, for example, the introduction of Douglas fir, which I think has great potential. It is important to mention at this point that the concepts presented are somehow simplification, and true learning and experience will come only with practice. So in the forest, quality trees are not regularly spaced, evenly spaced, and in reality is often required to make some compromise and accept trade-offs. For example, I mentioned earlier on, we want to select trees from dominant and codominant. Sometimes we need to accept some intermediate trees. And in this sense, it's important to develop critical skills when working with our forest resources. It is a learning process, and it's important to observe and adjust our management over time. Also very important is to enjoy and share your experience with other forest owners for collective learning and for mutual support. This brings us to the end of this two-part series on continuous cover forest management of broadleaf plantations. I hope you found it of interest and you took from it some pointers. Certainly there is much more that would need to be discussed, such for example, forest measurement techniques, harvesting systems, timber marketing, and I look forward to cover these topics in the near future. For now, if you require further information on forest management, you might check our website at teagasc.ie/forestry.